Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session today. So today we want to talk about triggers and near real-time patterns. So we will focus on one specific scenario, but of course, this is like a broader conversation that we could have. So just to show you the agenda I have for today. So first, we'll talk a bit about how to trigger a Rapidi schedule on demand. So how you can do that within Rapidi. Then I will show you in Salesforce how to set up everything so then you can trigger that specific schedule. And of course, I'll have this demo, show you how it's done, where you need to go, and what you need to do. Of course, so it's a simple process, but you do have to go through certain steps. Then we have questions. In case you have any questions, just use a chat, and then I will try to give you the needed answers, so to speak. Then we have upcoming sessions and resources. So first, when it comes to Rapidi and triggering schedule on demand, you have options. So Rapidi will provide you with a web service that you can use so that you can call your schedules from a different system. So when you're using that, then this web service will actually set the next date and time of the schedule to now, right? So then when you actually trigger the schedule, it will set it to run right now. It will run, and then the data will be transferred. And of course, the idea is that if you're using it, make sure that you do not schedule those large jobs, right, during the same time, because if you're transferring a lot of data, then the bandwidth will be taken by those. So the trigger will probably not be able to actually start the Rapidi schedule. And you have two web services. So you have the usual one, the Salesforce one. So you can use the outbound messages. You can configure those and then you trigger your schedules. Or you can have a generic one that would allow you to trigger schedules from other systems. So there are other systems, for example, ERPs, where you can make the necessary changes and then you can trigger any schedules. So I have seen both. I guess the most common one is the Salesforce outbound message, but also I've seen companies having a specific setup in their ERP, which allow them to trigger the Rapidi schedules. So you do have options, and then you would be able to start any schedule at any point in time. So that being said, when it comes to Salesforce, because of course this is something that can be done easily, so it's pretty straightforward. So if you need to trigger a Rapidi schedule, meaning you need to have an instancing happening, right, between Salesforce and a different system, then you have to go through some steps here. So step number one, you have to reach out to us so that we can add your Salesforce org on your service, because it needs to be there so that when Salesforce tries to send the data, it will be able to connect the Salesforce org with the right service ID. And then step number two is create a schedule in Rapidi. So this is the place where I get so many questions, right? So even though you go for an instant sync from Salesforce to a different system, you still need to create a schedule. So you just create it as usual. Let's say you create a schedule, you run it every, let's say, hour. And then you leave it as it is. And then that's the schedule that your trigger will actually use to send data to the other system. So the idea is that the schedule has to exist before setting up everything in Salesforce. So you'll have that. And then the idea here is that the schedule will run based on its frequency. So it will just run as usual. And it will be started immediately only when you trigger it, right? So you have both. So it's basically running every hour, unless, right, you trigger it and you want to send data instantly. And then there are some things that need to be done in Salesforce. So you need to add the schedule code, right, on that specific object that you are trying to use for this instant sync. So you go to that specific object, you create a formula field, and then you add the schedule code. Of course, in the formula field, if you have multiple schedules that you want to trigger, then you can set up some rules in there so that you trigger the right one. And then if you have multiple Rapidi services, the idea is that you need to also have a field called service ID. That way, it will point to the right service. If it's a one-to-one, meaning a Salesforce org and then just a Rapidi service, that's fine. But then if you have your Salesforce org and then you have 3 Rapidi services, right, then those will need to be listed as well. So you can still have formulas that would point, right, the trigger to the right service. So the same process as we have for the schedule code. And then you go ahead and create the outbound message. I will show you how to do that, but it's a simple thing. You go to the workflow actions, you create the outbound message, you set up the endpoint URL, which is this one. It's always this one. And then you add the schedule code to the selected fields, because of course that's something you want to send, and then you want to make sure that Rapidi receives the right information from Salesforce. And then, of course, in order for you to have an outbound message, you need to have a flow that's triggering all of this, right? So you go to the process automation, you set up a flow, and you actually define what the criteria would be, right? So then you say, okay, this has to be triggered when, let's say someone pushes this button, right? So when someone says, send to BC, right, has this checkbox, then that's a trigger for this outbound message, and then this is what's going to start the Rapidi schedule. Of course, you can have many other examples or maybe a combination of fields that you want to use as part of that, but the idea is that you need to have the flow, and within the flow, you would include the outbound message so that it actually triggers everything in there. So that's more or less, the theory. So let's say the part of it. So I will show you now how this works. I'll just share my my screen here. Okay. So let's start with the first part, right? So as I mentioned there, so first you need to set up your schedule. So your schedule can have any frequency. So it's up to you. You can put it once per day. It doesn't really matter, but it has to be an active schedule, right? So then as soon as you create the schedule, you'll have the schedule code, which is the one that you will be using in Salesforce, right? So then you would tell Rapidi, okay, I want to send this data instantly to my ERP, and then this is the schedule that has to be started. So first, of course, you have the schedule here set up. So this is active, so it's all good. Then you have to go to Salesforce and you go to outbound messages. Let me show you here. So here is the place where you would set up the outbound message for that, right? And then as I mentioned, based on your scenario, you need to have 1 or 2 formula fields. I will open this one here. So when it comes to an outbound message here, right? So when you create it, you do have to select the object. So then when you create it for the first time, you select the object. You can say account or maybe opportunities. So you select that and then you give it a name, as you can see it here, or something that makes sense. And then the endpoint URL, the one I had in the presentation. So then you just copy that here, and then the user, right, that has to send this. So you can put anything here. So it's up to you who is supposed to be added here. Now, of course, what you will see here, you'll see available fields. So you selected the object initially, right? So then you will be seeing what's available on that object. So the minimum that you would need would be the ID and then the Rapidi schedule code, which is the formula field from that object. Of course, if you have more than one service, Rapidi service, then you have to add this field as well. If you just have one service, then that's enough with the first 2 fields that I selected. So then this would be the setup for the outbound message to ensure that you are sending the right information. As I mentioned before, when it comes to the schedule code, it's either, like hard coding it, just adding a specific field like the schedule code the way you have it in Rapidi, or you create some rules around it. And then you can say, okay, if the legal entity is ABC, for example, then trigger this schedule. If the legal entity is D, then trigger this schedule. So you can also have this type of rules within the formula. So then when this runs, it will actually trigger the right schedule for the right entity. So that's something that you have to take into account when you are setting up the outbound message. So this is simple, and then you as soon as you have the mandatory fields in here, you just save it, right? So When you have saved it, then you will be able to see the information the way you have added it here. Now, of course, this is one of the things, right? So we have the outbound message, which is easy. And then we have to go and have a flow set up. So now this flow is supposed to function as the trigger for you, right? And then this flow is connected to my outbound message here, right? So this is the action that will be taken. So in your case, well, in anyone's case, you can define what needs to happen here, right? So in my case, I have object account. So I want this to be triggered when there's an update, right? Or, in your case, you can have that situation when a new account is created, right, and ready to be synced, or maybe when you have new accounts or updated accounts. So, it's up to you how you want to have it. And then you set up your conditions. So in a flow, you can decide exactly what you want to set up, what is supposed to be the trigger for you, right? In my case, I said, okay, I want this to be kicked off, right, when the send to BC is set to true, right? So that's the only thing that I want. And then as soon as, this is actually done, then the outbound message will run and the Rapidi schedule will be started, and then data will be sent to the other system. You can have many other conditions. It's up to you how you want to set it up. But of course, I think, the flow has to actually reflect what you want the trigger to do, right? So you have to make sure that that's something that can be done. Now, so first we had the outbound message, we had the flow, which has to be, completed, and then you have to have it as active and associated with your outbound message. And then when you have this done, then you can say, okay, then that's good. But then there's one thing that you need to check, right? So then you have to go to that specific object and make sure that you do have data in here, right? So for example, if you have the Rapidi schedule code and the service ID, you have you have both fields on the object. You have to make sure that there's something in here, right? Like it's not empty, right? So if you see the right schedule here, and then if you see the right service ID, it means that the formula is correct, and then you can actually push data to the other system. So then in this case, like in my case, I have sent to BC. So then I can say, okay, I want to make some changes maybe on this specific customer. And then I'm going to select send to BC and then save it. So then, this is the trigger that I had set up. So this is what's going to trigger my outbound message and then sending the data to Rapidi so that we can see that running. Now, if we go here and we look at that, then this schedule should start running. So as you can see here, it actually changed the next date and time, right? Because I had my trigger from Salesforce, right, that actually started this schedule and moved the next date and time, right? Because my schedule was supposed to run once per day, so that was midnight. But now it has been set up to this date because it is going to run. So you will always see this changing here if you are using this instant sync. And of course, if it runs multiple times, like every 2 minutes, for example, this will be constantly updated, and then you should be able to see data coming through. So then that's something that you should be able to see. In my case here, as you can see, my schedule run at this time here. So then if we expand this one, so it actually ran and then sent data to the ERP. So this was the trigger that I had set up in here. So if we go to this one here, the logs, we have the same thing. So you can have and then if you search for, let's say if we have here, right, so then if you search trigger, for example, in the logs, then you should be able to see this part, right? So this one would show you that this one has been set to run by Salesforce schedule trigger, right? So then you can tell when this actually run and send data to the other system. So it gives you a confirmation, right, of the fact that this is working and this is running. If you don't see this at all, it means that there's something happening either with the flow maybe, or maybe the outbound message, or any type of configuration that you have in Salesforce. But on any schedule that you have the outbound message set up, then you should be able to see this information in the logs. Of course, apart from what you see here, the schedule is going to run as usual as well, right? So if your schedule is running once per day, it will run once per day, and then in between it will run on demand, so to speak, because it will always run based on the triggers that you have set up for the specific schedule. So just as an idea, so you can tell exactly if this is working or not, make sure to check the logs. This will give you that confirmation, and yeah, I think, and then everything else will be running correctly. And then as you can see here, so we had the next date and time. It was moved to today's date and time. The schedule ran on demand, and then it got updated here. We have the last date and time was earlier, and the next one will be at midnight. But of course, if in between this schedule is triggered again by Salesforce, then both of them will be changed. And then you will see constantly, updated dates for them. So it's just a way to know when this one ran last time, right? And when this is going to happen next. So I think this is definitely a very straightforward process. And then, like I said, the more, I get a lot of questions about the formulas that need to be set up. So again, there, make sure that you set up the right one, and that you create rules around it if you want to trigger multiple schedules. And then also, before you set up anything in Salesforce, make sure that you do have your schedules here live and running, right? So that Salesforce can trigger something, right? Without the schedules in Rapidi, then you wouldn't be able to trigger anything, right? So you need to have that available here, and then you move to Salesforce and make the changes that you need to. And then another common, I think, misunderstanding is about the service IDs. So if you have just one Rapidi service, you can hard code the value in the formula field, that's fine. If you have more than one, make sure that you add it in the formula. If you don't add it and then you just leave the default one, then there will be a mismatch, right? There will be a mismatch between the schedule code and the service ID, because you can have two services, right? And then on one of them you have, let's say, customer sync running and active, and then on the other one you have a different schedule. And then if you mix them, then we get the request from Salesforce, but we see it as misconfigured, right? And then we cannot allow it, and we cannot process anything. So make sure that you do have the right service ID in case you have more than one Rapidi services. I think that's really, really important. Of course, if you need help with that, you don't know how to add them in the formula or what rules to set up, you can reach out as well, because we can definitely help you to set up the right formulas and then the right validations in place. So I think that was it for this part. Let me see. So if you have any questions, you can use the chat. Feel free to do that. If you have questions afterwards, which can happen, you can also reach out separately. Can ask me, anything that has to do with this topic, and then I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And of course, we do have other sessions coming. So this is the full page here. Then we have session 12, which would be in April. So then this is about tags and how to use tags on your setup. I think this is a good conversation. We get a lot of questions about tags and how to use them and how to best use them, actually. So I think this would be a really interesting topic. And then after this session, I believe we'll have one session about AI, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, how to use AI in my Rapidi. And I think this would be also really interesting. You can definitely use it for many purposes, since we have, enhanced it a lot during this months. And of course, if you have any feedback, if you want to add anything, just use this form, add any comments, and then I'll take a look and, do my best to provide you with the best content or to answer your questions. Resources here, so documentation. You can use the wiki if you need to search for anything, but of course, if you think that certain things are missing, certain articles, certain topics, you can also reach out to me and then I will look into that. I'm always updating the content and adding more, but of course, maybe sometimes I'm missing specific topics. And then support, if you need support, you can reach out. I think some of you have noticed that now support is also available within Rapidi, within my Rapidi. So that's the place where you would see a full list of the support cases that you have opened so far. And we have the product updates if you want to subscribe. So we usually post articles about different topics which are relevant, right? They are linked to integrations or anything that has to do with automation. And then we have the product release notes. So here we usually document all releases, what happened during that release, if there's anything new, any fixes, any new functionalities, or any new systems that we support. So like a more detailed description of what we have worked on. So yeah, feel free to take a look. And then obviously, if you have questions, you can definitely let me know and I will try to help. And then here I added some resources specific for the session. So this one is about how to trigger a schedule. So with screenshots, so it's easier to follow it and understand how this is supposed to work. And then we have how to set up a Salesforce outbound message or notification. The same thing here. Added screenshots so you can go through the process and be able to set up everything by yourself. And schedules, of course, just as a reminder that you need to have schedules set up before you go into the outbound message setup. And yeah, make sure that you go through all the steps during this process. And I think we covered everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I think we will see you again when we have our next session. If you have questions or concerns or anything, just reach out. I'm more than happy to help or try to answer any type of questions that you might have. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.